Your local superstore isn't hanging up warning signs, but 12 everyday groceries are disappearing from the order sheets right now, and the first clue won't be a bare shelf. It will be your own kitchen routine breaking down without a clear reason. This isn't speculation about empty warehouses or a call to hoard supplies. It's a quiet shift happening inside distribution centers where the numbers no longer match the demand, and by the time the math shows up on your receipt, the items you rely on may already be gone. Think about the last time you reached for a staple ingredient and found only a pricier version or a smaller package staring back at you. That moment of confusion is the signal. We are walking through 12 products experiencing a silent pullback, and the very first item on this list ends up sizzling in millions of American pans every single night. Stay with us until the final entry, because it isn't a luxury import or a seasonal treat. It's the quiet comfort poured into the first cup of the day for countless households nationwide. Product number 12, the workhorse of the dinner table, ground chuck and bulk burger meat. The initial item quietly being squeezed out of the supply chain isn't a high-end cut. It isn't a dry-aged steak or a rack of lamb reserved for special occasions. It is the humble ground meat that anchors 1,000 different recipes, from weekend patties on the grill to slow-cooked meat sauces and hearty casseroles that stretch a tight budget. Because it is so woven into the fabric of a standard grocery run, almost no one predicted it would be among the first proteins to show stress. But a receiver named Raymond, who processes inbound freight at a large regional hub, noticed the cracks forming long before the public eye could catch them. His role doesn't involve forecasting markets. He simply checks two sets of tedious data, the manifest of expected freight and the actual pallets rolling off the truck. And for ground beef, those digits started telling two completely different stories. It was not a one-time delay caused by a broken refrigeration unit. It was a steady, repetitive shortfall where deliveries consistently arrived at only 65 to 70% of what the system ordered. When that pattern locks in for consecutive weeks, it is no longer a logistical hiccup, it's a deliberate throttling of supply. The roots of this stretch far past the grocery aisle. Looking at early reporting from the USDA cattle inventory data, the national beef cow population contracted to roughly 27.6 million head, a number that rivals the lows last seen in the early 1960s. Following multiple seasons of shrinking breeding stock, fewer calves are entering the system while foreign imports from Mexico face their own set of hurdles. The pressure squeezes the entire meat sector concurrently. The retailer doesn't need to issue a press release about tightening margins. They simply reduce the order volume, and the customer absorbs the shock in a deeply personal way. Imagine a grandfather named Frank living in the Midwest. For decades, Saturday meant pulling a flat package of ground meat from the fridge to form burgers for his visiting grandchildren. Now Frank hesitates. He squints at the weight, flips the package over to check the price per pound, and mentally calculates if the tradition still fits into the fixed income he manages. That is the subtle danger of food inflation, not when a product vanishes, but when a family custom suddenly requires a cost-benefit analysis. Right now, many stores price this staple around $6.50 to $7 a pound. If the squeeze on cattle numbers persists, a jump to $8 or $9 by the year's end is a realistic scenario. And when ground meat climbs, families don't starve. They migrate. They switch to poultry, pork, or frozen alternatives, sending shockwaves through those categories too. So, the wise move isn't emptying the meat cooler. If your household menu relies on this protein, consider securing a manageable amount when you spot a fair price. A batch of 8 to 10 pounds divided into flat freezer bags with the date marked clearly can keep quality for 4 to 6 months without turning your deep freeze into a meat locker. And if the supply chain is already tightening on something as basic as burger meat, the next item is even more startling because it fuels the waking moments of a massive chunk of the country. Number 11, the morning dark roast and ground coffee. Coffee doesn't vanish in a chaotic scramble. It fades from the shelf in a manner so discreet that most shoppers miss the transition entirely. The aisle still smells rich. Bags stand upright in organized rows. From a distance, the illusion of abundance is flawless. But when you step closer to find the specific roast level, bean origin, or bag size you have purchased for years, that precise slot is empty. Not the whole section, just your section. This represents the stealthiest form of inventory reduction. There is no purchase limit sign taped to the shelf, no visible conflict among shoppers, just a gradual narrowing of variety. Premium single origin beans disappear first, then the mid-tier medium roasts, and eventually the larger bulk bags stop showing up as frequently as they once did. You still see coffee, but it's no longer your coffee. The trigger originates thousands of miles from the coffee pot. Brazil, which supplies roughly 40% of the global market, endured severe drought conditions that hammered Arabica-growing regions during recent harvest cycles. Some agricultural estimates suggest production drops reaching around 35%. When the high-quality bean supply tightens, retailers make a coldly practical decision. They retain the velocity sellers and prune the slower-moving stock-keeping units. That is why the shelves look full, while the selection shrinks to a generic handful. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, coffee prices surged approximately 33% year over year in early 2026. Currently, many popular bags sell in a range of $12 to $18. If weather volatility and freight costs continue their trajectory, seeing those same bags creep towards $16 to $24 by summer's end isn't far-fetched. What makes this particular item painful is the ritual it represents. It is the warm mug held in silence at 5:30 in the morning before the demands of the day begin. It is the automatic timer setting that signals stability. If your household runs on coffee, the practical approach is to buy a few extra bags during a sales cycle. Divide the contents into smaller airtight containers, store them away from direct light and heat, and if possible, keep the bulk in the freezer to lock in the volatile aromatics. The beverage hasn't ceased to exist, but your familiar version may slip away before you realize you need to hunt for a replacement. And if the substance in the morning cup is facing a selection crunch, the next item may startle even the most frugal shopper, because it was once considered the cheapest protein on the planet. Number 10, shell eggs and cartons. If there is one item that taught shoppers the definition of sticker shock, it is the humble egg. Not because eggs are a delicacy, but precisely because they were the universal cheap, fast, and nutritionally dense safety net for generations. A single egg could rescue a meal. A dozen could carry a household through a week of breakfast and baking. When that safety net frays, the anxiety is immediate. The disturbing element this time is the low volume of the alarm. You will not see apocalyptic empty coolers. What you will see is the disappearance of the 18-count value carton first. The store brand generic whites sell out before 10 a.m., and the specialty cage-free or organic options are there one restock and missing the next. The product is present, but the reliability is shattered. That silent scarcity is the most unsettling kind. According to the USDA egg market reports, the layer industry is still navigating the persistent disruptions of highly pathogenic avian influenza. When the virus hits a facility, the depopulation of the flock is swift and devastating. Restoring that production isn't instant. It takes months for new hens to mature to laying prime, and during that gap, the demand curve doesn't bend. As other protein sources like beef or fish climb, consumers pivot aggressively toward eggs. They are easy to portion, require minimal cooking skill, and serve vulnerable demographics like the elderly or single-person households perfectly. The volatility of the egg category is well documented in consumer price index data. At many major retailers, a standard dozen now hovers between $4 and $6, with localized spikes pushing even higher. Eggs don't need to vanish completely to disrupt a budget. They just need to inch upward while the large cartons become unicorns. The sane response isn't panic buying 10 cartons that will spoil in the back of the refrigerator. Picking up an extra dozen or two when the price is reasonable makes sense, provided your household eats them frequently. Always keep them in their original cardboard carton and store them on a fixed interior shelf, not the door, to maintain a stable temperature. Eggs have already taught the country a very clear lesson. Sometimes the most ordinary item is the one that can destabilize your weekly meal plan the fastest. And if eggs are starting to feel fragile once more, the subsequent item is even quieter because its freezer door stays full while the choices shrink one bag at a time. Number 9, frozen vegetables in bags. The frozen vegetable corridor rarely triggers a sense of urgency. It is cold, brightly illuminated, and bursting with vibrant green and orange packaging promising garden-fresh taste. Bags of broccoli florets, sweet peas, diced carrots, medley mixes, and stir-fry blends stack high in a display that screams permanent abundance. But here is the optical illusion most shoppers fall for. A problem in the frozen aisle doesn't manifest as a vacant freezer. It manifests as a reduction of options. Don't just count the total bags, count the distinct product codes. A vegetable that used to come in a private label budget size, a national brand mid-size, and an organic premium size now appears in only the high margin option. The family value bag that used to feed 5 for $1 less has simply vanished from the planogram. The freezer still looks loaded, but when you hunt for your specific bag of plain carrots, the answer is a silent, "Not this week." This isn't strictly a crop shortage, it is often a margin protection decision. As input costs for blanching, flash freezing, cold storage, and diesel transportation rise, suppliers consolidate their product lines. They focus on the fastest sellers or the items with the fattest profit margins. As a result, the budget-friendly mixed vegetables disappear, while the expensive organic steamer bags remain untouched. USDA projections for fresh vegetable prices indicate potential increases of 7 to 8% this year, and frozen food is not insulated from this because it shares the same root supply. Volatile weather in growing hubs like Florida and California reduces the raw tonnage, which then forces packers to make tough allocation decisions. The people most affected aren't impulse shoppers. It's the senior citizen making a pot of soup with half a bag of mixed greens. It's the working parents relying on the familiar frozen broccoli that their picky toddler will actually eat. When that exact SKU disappears, a simple side dish becomes a negotiation. Today, many standard bags of frozen greens retail for $2 to $3. If the cost of trucking and warehousing remains high, a jump to $3.50 or even $5 for certain varieties is plausible. The best defensive strategy is a gentle rotation. Each visit to the store, pick up 1 or 2 bags of the vegetables your family actually eats. Focus on variety: green beans, peas, broccoli, and stir-fry blends. Don't load your freezer with a single type. Preparedness isn't about accumulating mass, it's about accumulating the right options. The frozen aisle may seem untouched, but when the affordable versions start thinning out, observant shoppers should register the warning long before the general public catches on. Number 8. Canned tuna and shelf-stable fish. Canned tuna is the kind of quiet hero many people overlook until they have 15 minutes to make a meal and zero energy to cook. 1 can of flaked fish, a spoonful of spread, 2 slices of bread, and the immediate hunger is solved. No flame, no thawing, no electricity required if a storm knocks out the grid. That is why it occupies a sacred spot in the pantries of budget-conscious families, seniors, and anyone who values an efficient, shelf-stable protein. This is also the sort of signal our distribution contact Raymond says is naked to the human eye on a casual stroll. The shelf has cans on it, but the middle-tier choices aren't arriving on the trucks as consistently as they used to. To the passing customer, this seems trivial. To someone reading inventory spreadsheets, it's a clear narrowing of the category. The disappearance begins with the middle band. You will see the super cheap generic can that is mostly flaked dust, and you'll see the premium imported jar in olive oil, but the dependable national brand with the familiar logo, that one becomes hit or miss. When retailers trim variety, they don't cut the loss leaders or the top shelf premiums first. They surgically remove the middle, those items with thinner margins and slower turns. In the tuna section, that middle segment is precisely what millions of households rely on. The pressure isn't solely about fish stocks, it's about the metal cylinder itself. Every can demands aluminum, lithography for the label, fuel for the shipping lanes, and complex international logistics. A significant portion of the canned seafood market relies on sourcing routes stretching deep into Southeast Asia. When tariffs, alloy prices, and shipping container costs climb, even a humble can of skipjack stops being a cheap dollar menu item. Currently, a standard can sit around $1.50 to $2. If the cost of metal and import freight remains elevated, a surge to $2.50 or $3.50 per can is a tangible outcome. For the average person, that sounds like a minor nuisance. For someone who eats tuna 4 times a week as a primary protein source, it redefines the grocery budget. The intelligent play isn't filling a trolley with 100 tins. A rotating pantry of roughly 24 cans, spread across water-packed, oil-packed, and perhaps canned chicken or salmon, offers flexibility. Use the oldest stock first and replace it on deal days. Because when fresh meat becomes a luxury, canned protein is where the stampede heads, and a quiet supply chain can quickly turn a surplus into a shortage. Number 7, breakfast cereal boxes. The cereal aisle is a masterclass in visual deception. It remains a kaleidoscope of cartoon mascots, neon colors, and nutritional promises stretching from floor to eye level. Cheerios, flakes, frosted varieties, raisin bran, and endless puffed shapes create a landscape where change feels impossible. But 2 destructive forces are chewing through this aisle simultaneously: the shrinking box and the vanishing choice. Shrinkflation is the tactic where the cardboard stays the same price, but the inner bag loses an ounce or 2. SKU rationalization is when the company stops producing the flavor or size that doesn't print enough profit. Both occur in total silence. There are no announcements, just a lighter box and a craving you can't satisfy anymore. General Mills, the powerhouse behind some of the most iconic breakfast bowls, has reported dampened sales and margin pressures. Some Cheerios variants have been axed entirely. As grain futures jump and sugar tariffs and cardboard packaging costs climb, food giants protect their balance sheets by simplifying lines. They keep the bulletproof bestsellers and kill the marginal flavors. Shoppers internalize this loss in a domestic setting. A mom opens the box and thinks the bag wasn't sealed fully because it seems half empty, but it's just a smaller quantity. A grandparent searches for the specific oat cluster variety the kids love and leaves confused. A household that used to stretch 1 box across 5 breakfasts suddenly scrapes the bottom by Thursday. Not because appetites grew, but because the net weight shrank. Today, many standard boxes sell in a range of $4 to $6, with premium protein-added clusters reaching $8. As retailers prioritize high-velocity goods, the niche flavor or the budget giant size will likely vanish first. The solution is a return to basic arithmetic. Pick up 2 or 3 boxes when they hit a genuine sale, but only for the cereals your family will absolutely eat. Don't gamble on exotic new flavors just because they are marked down. Store them in a dry, sealed container and train your eye to look at the price per ounce, not the flashy sticker on the front. In this aisle, the most expensive thing isn't the price tag, it's the air you are silently paying for inside the box. Number 6, olive oil bottles. Extra virgin and pure olive oil are not exotic imports in American kitchens anymore. They are staple fats used daily for sautéing, roasting, and dressing greens. But this liquid gold is rapidly becoming one of the items experiencing the most drastic behind-the-scenes reduction. You can still see an entire wall of greenish glass bottles, but if you look past the front row, the familiar 1-liter size and the mid-range priced brands have patchy availability. What sits in abundance is either the tiny, overpriced premium cold-pressed bottle or a blend so refined it lacks any character. That is the inventory shift in action. For countless homes, olive oil is the foundation of the Mediterranean diet, a drizzle on hummus, a base for a warm pan of vegetables, or a dip for crusty bread. Yet the supply chain behind this ancient fruit is under siege. Spain, Italy, and Portugal, the dominant producers, have wrestled with brutal droughts and scorching heat waves that decimated olive yields. Concurrently, freight instability along key maritime passages has added a risk premium to every shipment that makes it to port. The arithmetic is stark. Olive oil prices inside the United States have nearly doubled compared with 2022 levels. A modest bottle now commonly exchanges hands for $10 to $16. If European production doesn't recover with a bumper crop, a leap toward $14 to $22 is well within the bounds of possibility. What's fascinating is that families aren't trading down because of taste. They are trading down because the budget breaks. When that happens, retailers prune the slow-moving middle tier and highlight the few bottles that turn over quickly. If you rely on this oil for daily cooking, you don't need a garage full of pallets. Keeping 2 or 3 extra bottles stored in a cool, dark cupboard and rotating through them is a sensible hedge. Preparedness means never being forced to buy a critical ingredient at its peak panic price simply because your current bottle ran dry on a Tuesday night. Number 5, peanut butter jars. One of the most fascinating gravitational pulls in a supermarket happens when the meat counter gets pricey. Without any marketing or coaxing, shoppers instinctively push their carts toward the peanut butter aisle. A sandwich made from this spread is breakfast, lunch, or a high-protein snack for pennies on the dollar compared to animal protein. It is a near-automatic economic reflex, and every retail analyst knows it. Because of this, as soon as beef and eggs climb, pressure accumulates on this specific shelf. The peanut butter section usually looks flush with product, but the family-sized twin pack or the natural stir variety sells out much earlier in the week. The mid-priced, low-sugar options appear sporadically, while the tiny jars and the luxury drizzles linger because their price per ounce is painfully high. This is the classic pattern of assortment trimming. According to USDA Peanut Outlook reports, the market is influenced by planting yields, shelling margins, and processing costs. When millions of consumers decide simultaneously that a peanut butter foldover is their inflation-fighting weapon, demand can hurtle past supply faster than the crop cycle can adjust. Currently, a standard jar ranges from $3 to $5. If the shift away from pricier proteins continues, along with rising packaging and transport costs, a range of $5 to $7 isn't an outlier scenario. But the price isn't the primary warning. It's the moment your exact texture and brand vanish. For those relying on this pantry workhorse, maintaining 2 backup jars makes practical sense, following a strict first opened, first used rotation. Don't buy it out of a sense of dread. Buy it because it's a high-utility food you will definitely consume. Because when the meat counter, the egg case, and the canned fish shelf are all under simultaneous pressure, a peanut butter sandwich stops being a boring brown bag lunch. It becomes the strategic protein reserve of the entire household. Number 4, bananas and avocados in the produce section. Can you recall what you paid for a single avocado or a pound of bananas the last time you shopped? Most consumers draw a blank, not from negligence but from muscle memory. These are habitual grabs. You pass the produce stand, pick a few firm fruits, drop them in a bag, and barely glance at the scale. It is only when the total bill is higher than expected, while the bag feels suspiciously lighter, that the silent price creep becomes clear. The cost doesn't need to explode to change your lifestyle. It just needs to nudge up frequently enough that you unconsciously grab 2 avocados instead of 3. At major retailers, bananas currently fluctuate around 54 to 58 cents a pound, with avocados ranging from $1 to $1.50 per piece depending on the season. These numbers seem harmless on the surface, but the logistics are fragile. Bananas are a massive volume import relying heavily on stable weather in Costa Rica and Colombia. Avocados lean heavily on the Mexican harvest. A disruption in irrigation, a dock worker's slowdown, or a spike in reef container costs can pinch supply in the blink of an eye. This is the hardest pullback to notice. The produce floor remains green and vibrant, but the banana pallets are built shorter, the display of ready-to-eat avocados is smaller, and the unripe, rock-hard substitutes take their place. Nobody calls this a shortage. They just adjust their guacamole recipe to stretch 1 avocado to serve 6. The smart approach isn't hoarding, it's waste reduction. Ripe bananas can be peeled, sliced, and flash frozen for morning smoothies. Ripe avocados can be mashed with a touch of citrus and sealed tightly against the air in the fridge. Don't overload your cart with delicate fresh fruit just because you fear future prices. With these items, the art of preparation is using them perfectly before nature reclaims them. If you have started buying less without ever making a conscious decision to do so, the pricing algorithm has already won the negotiation. Number 3, canned tropical fruit and cocktail mixes. Canned tropical fruit is the wallflower of the grocery store. Cans of sliced pineapple, mandarin orange segments, and fruit cocktails sit quietly on the shelf, unassuming and rarely the star of a shopping list. Nobody makes a special trip to a supercenter just for a tin of mixed fruit. Yet precisely because these items fly under the radar, their disappearance is a vital distress signal. When a product that receives zero hype starts to thin out, it suggests an unvarnished supply chain correction, not a demand panic. You will still see cans on the shelf, but the classic pineapple rings aren't restocking as fast. The large industrial-sized cans are missing, and the budget house label is replaced by a premium import charging twice the price. A few tropical varieties simply stop returning to the shelf entirely. This isn't a headline-grabbing famine, it's a silent reduction in culinary possibility. Picture a community potluck or a family reunion. Someone always brings a fluffy pineapple upside-down cake or a curried fruit salad. Nothing on that folding table is expensive, just cool, sweet, and familiar. But if the key ingredient jumps from $1.50 to nearly $3, or the large can no longer exists, that simple dessert becomes a cost calculation. The headwinds come from multiple vectors. Suppliers like Dole rely on cultivation and processing in distant tropical belts, including Southeast Asia. Monsoon patterns affect yields, diesel fuel moves the product, and aluminum tariffs inflate the cost of the can itself. Today, a typical can of tropical fruit retails for $1.50 to $2.50. If the metal and freight costs persist, a jump to $2.50 or $4 is entirely feasible. The kitchen defense is modest. Keep 4 to 8 cans in the cupboard if your family uses them. Pineapple for baking, mandarins for salads, and peaches for snacking. This isn't doomsday prepping, it's preserving the ability to create a little joy on a Sunday afternoon without needing a loan for a fruit salad. Number 2, dark chocolate and baking cocoa. The confectionery aisle doesn't look empty. The cheap sugary candy bars are still bursting out of their wrappers. But the real chocolate, the dark, bitter, pure cocoa powder, and the high percentage bars used for serious baking is retreating. For the casual impulse buyer grabbing a milk chocolate treat, the shift is imperceptible. For the home baker making brownies, cookies, or a birthday cake from scratch, the change is a punch in the gut. The familiar container of cocoa powder now costs significantly more. The bag of semi-sweet morsels is lighter, and the premium baking bar is locked inside a price that makes you place it back on the hanger. The culprit is a historic global cocoa crisis. West Africa, particularly the Ivory Coast and Ghana, supplies the lion's share of the world's beans. A trifecta of drought, aged diseased trees, and extreme weather has wrecked harvests. Global cocoa prices have soared over 130% compared to 2023 levels, according to market data reported by outlets such as NASDAQ and Euronews. When the fundamental raw ingredient becomes a precious metal, retailers and brands shift their focus. They heavily stock the mass-market milk chocolate items that use less actual cocoa and more filler, while the pure, high-quality baking items become scarce and overpriced. A typical premium chocolate bar now costs $3 to $6, and a container of baking cocoa can run $5 to $8. If the West African yield doesn't recover, the high-percentage cacao products will remain under severe duress. The practical step for home bakers is to keep a few containers of cocoa powder or a handful of quality chip bags on hand, sealed tightly and stored away from the heat of the oven zone. Don't stockpile chocolate bars if your home lacks climate control, as blooming and rancidity will ruin the stash. A simple tin of cocoa isn't survival food, but it's the difference between a blank countertop and the aroma of fresh-baked cookies that draws the family together in the kitchen. Number 1, milk, half and half, and coffee creamers. The final item on this list doesn't shock you because it is rare. It shocks you because it touches the very first minute of your conscious day. Before the emails load, before the doorbell rings, before the rush begins, a massive segment of the country performs a quiet ritual. They pour a stream of fresh dairy or a swirl of creamy vanilla into a steaming cup of dark roast and stand still for a few sacred moments at the kitchen counter. If that ritual gets disrupted, the entire morning feels broken. Dairy and creamers are currently absorbing cost pressures from a collision of angles: raw fluid milk futures, butterfat prices, sweeteners, vegetable oil bases for the non-dairy options, heavy plastic packaging, and the massive cost of cold chain logistics to keep it all fresh. According to USDA Dairy Outlook reports and BLS Dairy CPI indexes, this category is among the most volatile in the fresh grocery sector. A gallon of whole milk commonly lands between $3.50 and $5, while a flavored liquid creamer can range from $4 to $7. If input costs keep climbing, a further 10 to 20% increase is not just possible, it is likely. However, the more urgent issue isn't the dollar total. It's the targeted removal of variety. The specific creamer flavor you adore might not be discontinued outright, it just shows up in a smaller bottle now. The club size half and half vanishes, forcing you to buy two smaller ones for a higher combined price. The promotions dry up, and the day you run out, your exact brand is simply missing. Whole milk is there, but the organic, grass-fed, or lactose-free version you need isn't on the shelf. That's how a tiny erosion of choice enters the most intimate part of a morning. What is most sobering about this entire list isn't a prediction of famine. It's the recognition that change advances on slippers, not combat boots. Fewer choices, compressed sizing, creeping price points, and a reduced guarantee that the exact item you want will be there. The calm and perceptive household doesn't buy out of terror. They buy with precision because they know their own consumption habits. An extra bag of coffee, a few backup cans of tuna, a spare bottle of olive oil, a can of cocoa powder. Each item is small and manageable, but bought at today's price before tomorrow's reset, it builds a buffer of stability. Some people have access to supply chain intelligence terminals, the rest of us have to read the grocery shelves, and the shelves are often a few weeks behind the leading edge of reality. This isn't extreme stockpiling, it's the blueprint for a calm kitchen that protects its finances, preserves the comfort of familiar cooking, and refuses to be blindsided by the quiet erosion of choice. So out of the 12 critical items on today's list, which one would you buy a little earlier on your next grocery run? If this breakdown helped you see the store differently, please hit the like button so my channel can reach more folks who want to stay ahead of the curve.